I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane, broadcasting from the Marcus Garvey House here in North Minneapolis. And you know, it's all about the neighborhood. This is a conversation about how we build our community, our neighborhood, house by house, family by family. We're focusing on business creation, business development, economic development, and culture. It's a wonderful conversation, a robust conversation. One of the guides for this conversation is my brother, who takes us on a musical journey, Wayne McFarlane and jazz. Check him out.
In my room, I feel good when I'm thinking about my neighborhood.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Today's conversation is an important one. We continue to focus on the political future of our community. One of the important seats in North Minneapolis, a historic seat, is the one being sought by these candidates who want to represent this district, District 59B, in the Minnesota State House of Representatives. I'm pleased to have as co-pilot in this conversation one of the originators of that role, Reverend Randolph Stadden, served this district. I think when you were in, Reverend Stadden, it was probably a different number. A different year. but let me do this. Let me have you spend a minute talking about our district. What's kind of the profile, the history of now 59B? And after that 1 or 2 minute introduction, I'm going to ask the candidates to introduce themselves.
Well, the district, when we took it over, there had never been an African American who had been elected that served in a public policy position in terms of state government or city government, because Van White, who was the first alderman who was elected then, was elected as a result of a mechanism that we put together to expand diversity as far as the legislative process is concerned. We thought that was critical and that was important. And so we organized the entire district, precinct by precinct, and then ended up, after losing twice, we ended up winning the seat because there are so many critical things that's happening as far as the legislature is concerned. It's the body that sets the major policy that controlled areas in terms of economics, in terms of criminal justice, in terms of jobs, and a number of other things like that. So it was important then, and it's important now.
Reverend Stadden, thank you. With that, let me introduce the candidates who are here today. Bill McGaughey is a candidate. He's a Republican who's running to serve this district in 59B in North Minneapolis. Terra Cole is a candidate who is a DFLer, as is Raymond Dehn. So thank you all for being here. Let me ask you to tell this audience why you want to serve them as the state representative for 59B. Raymond Dehn, first with you.
Well, first off, thank you for this opportunity to speak about what I consider, of course, a critical race, as I'm one of these candidates. Tell you a few things about myself. I've been a Minnesotan pretty much my whole life. I grew up just north of North Minneapolis, out by the Crystal Airport. I tell people I spent a lot of time on the north side in my adolescence, maybe doing things I shouldn't have been doing. I've lived here now for the past 12 years, and when my partner Joan and I were looking for a place to relocate as we became a team, we looked to the north side because, quite frankly, the diversity of the people, the environment, the richness that existed here was something that we longed for. And it also fit with our family, sort of the dynamics relative to that. I'm an architect by training, graduated from the university back in the mid-90s, and have been practicing over about the past 15 years or so. And I think that it's a unique skill in the legislature. We don't have a lot of architects. We have a lot of attorneys, but not a lot of architects. You know, I came to run for this position because of some of the things that, of course, happened on the north side relative to Linda Higgins deciding to retire, and then Bobby Joe Champion deciding to run for the state Senate seat. And it wasn't something I did lightly. I spoke to probably about 15 people about this because I knew that over the past 30 years, as Reverend Stanton had just mentioned, that this district had been represented by a person of color. And for those of you who can see me, I'm a white male, but if you're listening on radio, you may not get that. And I knew that that was going to be part of the issue in this seat, and it was something that I thought deep and hard about before I decided to jump in. I think some of my life experiences, although they may not be a typical type of life experience, I think it definitely has prepared me to represent what I think might be the most diverse district in the state of Minnesota. You mentioned it covers North Minneapolis, but it also covers about 80% of downtown and a sliver of the Bryn Mawr neighborhood. So it's the most diverse district, not only racially and culturally, but also economically. We also have 50-story skyscrapers, and we have little tiny, two-room houses where people live. So it's a unique district, and I think very unique to the state of Minnesota. My life experiences aren't what most people think. They say that you can't judge a book by its cover, and I like to think that I'm one of those books that you can't judge by the cover. As I mentioned, I grew up just outside of city of Minneapolis. My house was 600 square feet. There were 6 of us that lived in the household. I grew up in the 70s, and ultimately, I ended up developing a pretty severe drug addiction. And as a result of that drug addiction, I was arrested and convicted of a burglary in 1976. I was sentenced to serve 5 years, which the judge suspended, and I was sentenced to the county workhouse for a year sentence with the opportunity to get out to go to drug treatment. I was fortunate that my father was a Teamster. We had health insurance, so after serving about 7 months, I was able to get to go leave lockup to go to drug treatment, and I've been sober for the past 36 years. And I was able to turn my life around, and I think most people made mistakes when they were young. Recent science shows that your brain doesn't really develop till you're about 25. You don't understand the consequence effect of some of the decisions you make. In 1982, I applied for and received a pardon extraordinary from the state of Minnesota. And I never had to check a box after that time. And I know there are folks out there that have made mistakes early in their lives, and they continue to pay for them every day when they're looking for a job or looking for a place to live. And I want to go to the state capitol. I want to look at other legislators and say, crime isn't just what we get painted in the news. Crime is also people like me, and probably some of them as well. They just didn't get caught. To sort of change what that conversation is about. I'm not naive enough to know that in 1982, being a young man that was white probably had something to do with me receiving a full pardon from the state of Minnesota. And to be honest, my passion for going to the Capitol is to really dig down deep on the criminal justice system that today incarcerates 4 times the number of people than it did only 30 years ago. So that's why I'm running. That's what I want to do, and thank you for this opportunity.
And that's a great introduction. Thank you, Ray Dehn. Terra Cole, take the same amount of time to sort of lay out to this audience, these viewers, your passion, your vision, why you want to serve this district in the state legislature.
Well, again, my name is Terra Cole. I've been a resident of North Minneapolis for the last 24 years. Looking at my face, you might think I'm 24, but I am 34 years old. I am a product of this community. I am a graduate of North High School. I have a master's degree in urban regional planning from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I have a bachelor's degree from Dillard University in New Orleans, which is a historically black college. And I am the return on the investment that my educators, my community members, and my elders have made. This is what you get when you invest in your youth. I'm excited and encouraged by community members, both those who may be a little more seasoned, and by those who are very young about running for this seat. This is our opportunity, our true opportunity to take control of our government and to ensure that the tax dollars that we pay, whether it be in property taxes, sales tax, income tax, that we get that fair share back. Our government does a lot of great things. We just don't know about it. We don't know those secret places. We don't know about that hidden money. Sometimes we don't even know about things that are just even apparent about how to go and get resources. We just heard a conversation about that. My job as your elected official, soon to be elected official, and other elected officials as well, is to be your advocate, to be your intermediary, to be that translator for you to help you find your way into a system that you pay for. I talked a little bit about my background. The reason why I'm running is kind of twofold. I was just having an interview earlier and talked about how I was really running away from this calling of running for office. I didn't really decide that I would run for office until about 4 years ago. My investment in my community is about how do I make the most impact? How do I make impact at a level that will create regional change? So I thought when I graduated from graduate school that that would be at Hennepin County. I worked as a senior planning analyst there in their research and planning and development office, where I worked with all of the commissioners, the county administrator, and the department directors, and had the privilege of co-leading the county's census promotion program, both internally and externally with employees. The success of that program under my leadership allowed Hennepin County to be the #1 county in census return and kept our congressional seat. We kept the last allocated congressional seat based on the work that I did in communities of color. That's important. But what's more important is how we did it. We did it by building relationships. We went into communities and sat down and became the advocate, the tool, the intermediary, that translator for communities to the federal government, and explained why the census is important to them, both as employees and as residents, the money that would be lost by lack of participation, and what we stand to gain by that level of participation. By doing that, the Seward community, the Somali community, the African American community, but especially the Latino and the Native American community raised their numbers exponentially. We don't understand that where we go for services and how we identify as ourselves are inextricably linked. Our voting process starts with the census. That is the most important thing that you will do in your lifetime, but it's also the most equitable thing that you will do in your lifetime, because everybody counts, everybody matters. But translating that information into a language and a meaningful personal conversation was something that the federal government, or at the time when we started, the county government wasn't able to do. So myself and my other co-lead pulled out our personal Rolodexes of people and ensured that we invited communities of color to the county where we've had the most successful event with the most people of color. Each of the commissioners were involved intimately in their communities around issues related to the census that met their specificity. We were able to work with all 5 urban Indian tribes, something the Census Bureau was not able to do, bringing them together to talk about why the census was important for their communities, both in urban areas and out on the reservations, to the point where their numbers have been the highest that they've been counted. We know there's people here, but actual counted numbers. How we did that was by building relationships. It takes time to build relationships. My background is in community engagement. I'm a trained facilitator, I'm a trained strategic planner, and I'm a trained, I'm also a trained, and I'm not a mediator, trained in a bunch of other stuff too. But what's most important is that relationship building and knowing that it takes the time to build that relationship. And once you've done that, the work that you need to complete goes so much faster because there's trust. There's distrust between community and government, but employees and government. And our employees in public service are our most important asset because they make things go and they make things stop. And so we have to learn that when we start doing our stakeholder analysis, first we need to do them. Let's start there. And then integrate all of that into our process so we know when we're allocating funds to community, that we know why, we have a plan behind it, we can evaluate it, we can measure it, and we can ensure that there's a return on the investment. As I said before, I am your return on your investment. You can see me, I'm measurable. We need to do the same for people, for others in our community.
Thank you, Terra Cole. I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to Conversations with Al McFarlane. You're viewing Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue in a moment with another candidate. We're pleased to have Bill McGaughey. Stay tuned. We'll continue this conversation introducing to you candidates for 59B.
Into the light of the cold black night. Blackbirds sing in the dead of night, yeah. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see again. Oh, your life, we were only waiting for this moment to be free. We were only waiting for this moment to be free. Can you help me sing? Black, David Island. Robert Hickman on vocals. Yeah, yeah. Can you help me sing Blackbird fly? Birds fly. Birds fly. Birds into the light of the cold black night. Once I had a girl, or should I say, she once had me. She showed me her room. Isn't it good? Ebony wood. Blackbird.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We continue our conversation with candidates for Minnesota House of Representatives for District 59B here in North Minneapolis. First of all, we want to thank the Minneapolis Urban League for allowing this forum. We're glad to be here, and it's the right thing for us to do to host important conversations about our community and our political future. Now, Bill McGaughey, candidate who's a Republican. Bill, thank you for your candidacy. Take time to introduce yourself to this audience and tell why you want to serve them in the state legislature.
Okay. Thank you, Al. I appreciate the relatively open-ended nature of this discussion. This is an open seat. It's been vacated by Bobby Joe Champion. I think we've got 3 DFLers, we got 2 Republicans, and a person from another party. The Republicans haven't traditionally done too well in this district. I think my opponent got 19% of the vote in the last race. It's been redistricted a little bit. But Republicans traditionally haven't been popular in this area or in Minneapolis. I actually ran as the congressional candidate of the Independence Party a couple years ago against Keith Ellison. Got 7% of the vote. But I'm switching to the Republican Party because I have a particular issue that distinguishes me from what I perceive as the main core of the DFL. First of all, I should say, as far as myself, I worked as the cost accountant for the MTC, the bus company, for a number of years. I got laid off. I bought some rental property. I've been a landlord for 20 years now. You may be aware of a shooting that took place on Glenwood Avenue. It happened on my block. The news report showed my building. Fortunately, it wasn't in my building, but it shows the constant danger that we're living under here in North Minneapolis. However, let me say first of all, I don't think that the state or the state representative's position is necessarily the point position for economic development. I think that the solutions probably lie at the federal level. There have been some very bad mistakes made. There seem to be no signs of correcting them. We can do a few things here. We can try to get our fair share of the grant money. But basically what we can do at the state level, I think, is create a system of laws and practice that is fair to people. And I'm talking primarily about the police department. Like Ray, I was arrested more recently, and this is my issue. I'm a single issue candidate, pretty much. I was arrested for domestic abuse. It happened twice. I was going through a divorce, still am. The first case, my wife and I got into a dispute about a check register. She took it from me, I took it from her, she bit me. I freed myself, then she called 911. Cops came, arrested me, put me in handcuffs without asking any questions, and I was in the system. What I don't like, it's not necessarily the disputes, or the cops lie on reports. I know that. I know what happened. I know what they said. Even my wife said that what the cop wrote was not true. I didn't punch her in the face 4 times. Of course not. But that's what they go by. We can't have this. The cops should not lie. And when they do, there should be consequences. The second time was part of the divorce. I actually called 911. My wife was throwing things at me. She took off after interrupting the phone conversation. I went, an hour and a half later, I went outside, shoveled snow. The cops picked me up again. She said I had hit her. This time there hadn't been any physical contact whatsoever. Well, the police officer said he had to arrest me. I guess there's something about automatic arrest policies, especially if men are involved. So here I was. This time I had violated parole. I pled guilty, continuance, which would have meant that I would be, the charges would be dismissed in a year if nothing happened. Unfortunately, something did happen, the false arrest this time. So now I was in big trouble. And again, the cops lied on the police report, and I tried to get it corrected, went up to the chief. For some strange reason, they didn't want to correct obvious matters of fact, such as pointing out that I had called 911 earlier in the day. I've read the law. It stinks. It stinks because you can arrest people without probable cause. It stinks because they put people out of their homes for extended periods who are possibly innocent. It stinks because you can be accused of making somebody afraid. I mean, if I were a rough-looking guy at the bus stop and some woman called and said she was afraid of me, would the police would they take me to jail for that? No, but if I'm her husband, it'll take me to jail. This is not what we should be living in America. This is the type of thing that the state legislature is there for, to look at the fundamental laws. We can't have a police state. We just can't do it. And if the police are going to misbehave like that, somebody's got to be at the Capitol calling them to account. Now, that's what I'm going to do if I get elected to the state legislature. I'm going to make sure that we have constitutional protections maintained and that nobody lies and gets away with it in government positions. It's an epidemic that's got to be stopped. So I'm kind of focused on that. I'll do my best in many areas if I'm elected, but I have a passion for making sure that we don't have this kind of system run amok, which we do at the present time.
Thank you, Bill McGaughey. Reverend Stadden, as you listen to these candidates, what questions come to your mind in terms of their presentations and their motivations for seeking office? And how should our community begin to assess these candidacies?
Well, I think that one of the things that we do is that we try to check our best value system. And what we want to do is to look at our community to see what our great needs are as far as our community and to see who can best represent us in terms of serving those needs. There are a number of areas that I would have questions about, but of course, today everybody is talking about the question of the economy and jobs. And so, of course, that's probably one of the first questions that I want to ask. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics just recently issued a report on unemployment. It said that Minneapolis has the largest disparity between African Americans and whites in the entire United States of America. Black unemployment rate at 22%, white unemployment rate at 5.8%, meaning black unemployment rate 3.4 times that of white employment. Now, one of the things the paper said as far as this was concerned, well, it maybe have to do with education, but that does not cut out the fact that black folks with a college education still make less than white folks with a high school education. So that throws out just that part. That may be part of it. But I guess I would like to know from the candidates, how would they resolve or deal with this problem of unemployment, and particularly the racial disparities in unemployment in this district?
Let's start with Bill McGaughey, and maybe a 1-minute answer.
Okay. I think part of it is maybe matching people to jobs. If there are people of color in North Minneapolis and the jobs are in the suburbs, we've got to have transportation that gets people out to the suburbs and back that is affordable. That would be one thing. We should also have development in this area. I think the DFL City Council has destroyed businesses. I protested the destruction of Uncle Bill's Food Market a couple years ago. We can't go tearing down businesses and micromanage things. You got to let people come in here. If they're willing to put their money here, then operate freely. But we've also got to be concerned about the mobility of labor.
Terra Cole, your response, please.
There's a couple different factors. One I would like to say is that our workforce centers are antiquated. They cater to a market of people that may not have a GED. Nothing wrong with that. But the levels of those who are unemployed are educated. So we have to look at our workforce centers, which are good tools and that are state funded. How do we use them in a way that is most effective and most beneficial for the needs of the community? They could be business incubation centers. They could be places where there's shared workspaces. All different kinds of innovative ideas with a tool that we already have. We need to be innovative about that. Another piece that is important is discrimination in and of itself. The instances of workplace discrimination have gone up both at the state level and at the federal level within hiring as well as with firing. Those are things that we have to look into because it's not just I'm not educated enough. It's not that I'm not credentialed enough. There is something else that's underneath all of this that we must investigate and we must correct, whether it is with fines, punishment, exposure, whatever. We must do that. And again, I agree, transportation for this district, and especially North Minneapolis, has been the major issue. For over 30-something years, we have had lack of transportation to the job growth centers, which are in the western and now northwestern suburbs. We must solve that equitably and in a way that both serves the needs of the residents, but also the business community. And we must support strongly and wholeheartedly our small business owners.
Raymond Dehn, your response.
Well, if I could just delve into the numbers that you just mentioned, Reverend Statton, it's 5% overall in the city of Minneapolis, so that's even taking into account the 22%. So the rest of the city is probably closer to 5.3%. And if it was a point lower, it would be considered full unemployment. So the majority of unemployment right now happens on the north side. And if we are going to change that, there are probably a few things that we need to do. One of the things that I would propose is that we begin to align our local, county, state, and federal dollars when it comes to jobs, programs, and investments in companies to expand their workforces. Right now, we have a lot of these agencies doing different things, and since they're not concentrated, we're not having the same type of impact. We have this crazy, crazy thing called war on drugs. Many young men in our community have a criminal record. It could be between 15 and 20%. We need to change, one, the war on drugs. And two, we need to change the practice that employers have when they ask you that question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Because I don't care who you are as a human development person, if you have two applications and one has a box checked and the other one doesn't, I'm gonna bet 9 times out of 10, maybe even 99 times out of 100, you'll give that job to someone who didn't check that box. So what I would propose is we continue to push private employers to change that, as well as the state begin to take control of background checks and criminal records, so that these third-party data harvesters who don't scrub their information when someone gets an expungement, who don't take the information out when someone who has served their continuance and not been convicted of a crime, that those things begin to change, because there are obstacles that are structural that we need to change. And of course, all of us on the north side, we need to start spending our money in our community, because if we don't spend our money in the community, there's not going to be the need for employment. Lowering taxes doesn't create jobs. People spending money creates jobs. So that would be my response.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue with these candidates for for House seat 59B in just a minute. Stay tuned.
Dream of the land my soul is from. I hear a hand stroke on the drum. Of delight, cocoa hue, says the night, Afro glow. American boy, beautiful girl, dancing for joy, to come world. Of delight, cocoa hue, reaches the night, Afro glow.
David Island, Mr. Bruce Jackson.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We're closing our conversation with candidates for House District 59B. It used to be 58B. The district was served by Bobby Champion. In fact, the district was served by Reverend Randolph Statton. His organization put together the first African-American political machine, so to speak, that resulted in black people beginning to serve representing this district in the legislature some 20 years ago. I want these candidates to address this question of the black community in North Minneapolis. How do we look at the needs of the black community, the presence of that community, and the changing demographics in a way that deals with the need to have more housing and more people in North Minneapolis? And the second part of the question is, how do we create policies at the state level that enable economic development? How do we get our people to see ourselves as entrepreneurial, creating the ability to serve each other in the community? Before I ask you to answer those questions, I want to hear from one member of the audience, Ms. Deborah Brown. We often talk about people need to be qualified. And this is a big problem because when we are qualified, we often find institutions, businesses, resources still unresponsive to our desire to be the hardworking citizens they say they want us to be. Ms. Brown, thank you for raising your question, telling your story. How are you today?
Well, I want to share my story because, yes, I do have a personal self-interest, but I want to connect it to the community and how you as policymakers, practitioners can look back at the community and say, yeah, there's a structural problem because we're told if we work hard, we go to school, we be a good team player, we have a positive attitude and aptitude, and we network and we look for it and we go out and get it, it shall come. I'm a story where I was fired from my job and I was told that I was not a good fit for the position. What does that mean? I will ask again. I deeply know what it means, and I know what it meant, being I was only one of probably 3 people of color out of the organization. But I really would like to say there are many qualified African Americans and other people of color in our communities. There are a lot who need to be included in the workforce, but there also are a lot who are qualified, but we're not being let in. And when we are being let in, we are discriminated against, we are scrutinized, we are watched, we are harshly undue treated. And I have a master's degree. You may have seen some of my photos on some of the bus stops. I have a master's degree in public administration, and I've worked very, very hard. No one gave me anything, I earned it. And so all I'm asking is for the doors of opportunity to be open.
And with
I
the
can
master's
take it
degree,
from
you're
here.
unemployed presently.
Yes, sir.
And the problem is that institutions that say they want to engage and hire and reward that training, you find out they don't mean that.
They don't mean that.
What do you do, candidates? How do you, and that's a story that many people in North Minneapolis can relate to. What do we do about that? How do we solve that? Ray Dehn, let me start with you.
Well,
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
I mean, landing a job is a tough thing, and the longer you've been unemployed, the tougher it becomes. I think that oftentimes employers hire for many, many different reasons, and I don't know the specifics of your case, but you know, there is something to be said about what affirmative action was meant to be, and that was that if your workforce did not reflect the community, and when I mean community, I mean the larger region, you needed to affirmatively act to do that. And that doesn't mean that you give anybody a huge advantage because they're a person of color or things like that. But what it means is if you have an individual who is capable of doing that job, that you affirmatively act to employ them. And so it doesn't just mean that, well, we looked at all the candidates and we like this one. It's like, no, you need to take a personal investment as an employer to say, I am going to have my workforce reflect this community region in which I live. So, you know, it's not a quota system. I know that this often gets painted as a quota system. It's not a quota system. It's something that we ask people to do, and I believe one of the candidates mentioned earlier that when we have areas of discrimination, we need to do something about that.
Terra Cole.
Ms. Brown, from one black woman to another, I understand your story. I've had that story. And what we must do as women and as black people, we must speak out. When we don't talk to HR, when we don't call the state, when we don't call the Department of Labor, and when we do not call the EEOC, they don't know, and they cannot act. There is a serious problem of discrimination in Minnesota when it comes to young women, young black women, young highly educated black women. We know there's a discrimination with black men, and there's a whole lot of reasons around that. But there is measurable discrimination around a particular gender. Affirmative action has been highly effective for white women, but not as effective as it's been for other women of color. So what I suggest, because there are solutions, but we have to get to them together. The biggest one is that we must say something about the type of discrimination. We must document that discrimination, and we must not back down from saying that I have been discriminated against because I am black, I am female. They went and make it your business to find out who they hired in your place, who they took instead of you, because without that information, we have to prove the burden that we've been discriminated against. From the state level, our job is to ensure that you are able to do that effectively and that you're able to do it in a way that does not damage you personally or your career. So I understand.
Bill McGaughey.
The city of Minneapolis twice tried to run me out of business. In 1965, and more recently, condemning my house when I was not allowed to live there. In the first case, landlords organized and we threw Jackie Cherry Homes out, and we put Natalie Johnson Lee in. So the first thing is, we gotta stop destroying jobs. If there's a tornado in North Minneapolis, we don't pile on by throwing people out of their homes. We let them repair their homes. But employment is not guaranteed, or business in this area. You have to allow the people who have the spark of creativity and ambition the ability to do what they do and hope that it succeeds. The problem is we have an imbalance. What's happening, actually, the manufacturing jobs have left. They've gone to China. And you know what's happening now? The jobs are disappearing in China. They're going to replace these workers with robots. What do we do about it? I think shorter work hours is the answer, but it can't be done at the legislature. It has to be done federally.
One more question. Sir, say your name.
Decluid.
And your question, sir.
My main concern is education. Bringing schools back to the north side of Minneapolis, because recently they just got rid of North High School. But my concern is the elementary school. All the schools now are being closed down on the north side. Where is the education? So when these young men that's looking for jobs or looking for some kind of way to better themselves, there's no education. There's no rehabilitation. after they come out of jail and stuff like that. So and bring back education to the north side. Stop destroying education.
Thanks for the question and comment. Candidates, Ray Dehn first. Education and training, how important are they? What will you do from the policy level to ensure, expand education and training for the residents of 59B?
Well, as a state legislator, there's the opportunity to control budgets and things like that. Ultimately, the Minneapolis School District makes final decisions relative to that. And I hate to do this, but North High is not closed. It is open. They will be admitting another 9th grade classes following year. This past year, I actually was a mentor, and I encourage everybody to become a mentor for a student in North High, because if they're going to achieve, they need to have that encouragement. They closed all the feeder schools to North High, so what were they thinking? Without students, how can a high school exist? I think our education is a really, really troubling piece. Just as we have the disparity in jobs, we have disparity in education. And I don't think it's because we have a lot of young kids in our community that don't want to learn. Oftentimes, if you happen to move once or twice in a year, it creates a sort of a difficulty where you might have trouble in the classroom. And I think we need to deal with those types of real-life situations we have within the Minneapolis public school system.
Terra Cole.
When we start talking about education, and particularly about school closings, previous candidate that spoke previous to me was correct. The feeder schools were closed, but it was a systematic reason for doing so. The job as your state representative, no, I can't directly affect the closing or the opening of any particular school, but my position as a representative is to use that as leverage to talk with the school board, with our school representatives, and with the city council to find out, what are you doing? Because when they closed the schools, at the exact same time, the city council was pumping up, we want you to move to North Minneapolis, we're gonna give you some money, and here's some grants, and here's this, completely uncoordinated. Who in the world is gonna buy a house next to a closed school and stay there more than 3 years, or 5? When, at my age, at 34, if I'm buying a house as soon as I have kids, I'm moving somewhere where there's a school so my kids can go. Disjointed, uncoordinated. The job of the representative is not just to serve you at the state level during the session, but to be your advocate and your intermediary when I'm not in session, to use that position for leverage.
Thank you, Terra. Bill McGaughey, briefly.
Well, I think the politicians have micromanaged education. One of the buzzwords is results, good teachers, good schools. You can't always measure everything. I think there's got to be a greater degree of trust in the people who staff these institutions. There's got to be a greater variety of options available to parents. But again, there are no guarantees. We don't want to have schools as holding tanks for people who can't get jobs. Education as an end in itself. No, schools have got to be competitive, make the studies interesting, and hope that it ignites interest in the students. It doesn't always, but it just well may if people are given a chance.
Thank you. I'm going to close with Reverend Staton. I'm interested in encouraging our community to really pay attention, to get involved, to go vote. The primary is coming up. It's August 14th. How do we mobilize our community to pay attention to this race and other races as well? Give me a comment on that. And after that, I'm going to ask the candidates to make a closing statement. You too, I'm asking you to invite our viewers and our listeners to support you, but most of all to engage and to voice their opinion for the development of our community. Reverend Staton, what do you think?
I think that it's important when we look at the conditions we find ourselves in. I think when you look at the question as far as education is concerned, when our kids can't get an education in school, but we find out the same kids can go to Harvest Prep and others and get an education, so it's not about whether or not they can learn. We need to look at some things that's happening from an institutional, systematic point of view. When you look at the disparities that exist as far as employment is concerned and unemployment, the disparities we talked about, we've got to wake up and really say out loud that really racism is well and alive, and there must be people who are willing to be bold enough to stand up to it and to eradicate it and to organize wherever we need to organize to get it done. That ought to excite folk, because our way of life really depends upon us getting folk elected that can operate in our best interest.
With that, candidates, let me ask you to close. Make the invitation, convince our listeners and our viewers why they should support you. Ray Dehn, I'll start with you.
Well, first off, I would tell everybody out there listening and watching, get engaged. 10 years ago, I got engaged in this community, and I've been working to impact the lives of people who live here. I have 10 years of proven leadership. My first start was being involved with the NRP Phase 2 Action Plan, which was a couple $1 million, and lo and behold, I ended up being the chair of that group that, decided where that money would go. I continue to be engaged in my neighborhood organization as well, and continue to this day. I've gotten engaged with Take Action Minnesota and their Justice for All campaign, which is fighting for people that do have criminal records so that they can become employed. For the past 2.5 years, I've been co-chairing the Northside Transportation Network with Representative Bobby Joe Champion about the Bottineau LRT, about how do we get transit access to people on the north side. In addition, I've been on the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee for the City of Minneapolis the past 6 years, and I've been the chair of the Human Task Force. That group decides where $500 million of the City of Minneapolis capital bonding money goes every 5 years, and they make a recommendation to the mayor and the city council on that. I've also been involved with public-private partnerships like 2020 Partners, which formed around the development in the North Loop relative to the New Twins Ballpark, and it continues to meet this day to what happens to that neighborhood. And lastly, I'm proud to have the endorsement of Congressman Keith Ellison, as well as the endorsement of 43,000 workers that work for AFSCME, the public employees of the state, county, and municipal employees group as well. So I encourage everybody to get out and vote on August 14th. It's your civic duty. Please do it, and vote for me.
Terra Cole.
I encourage everyone to go out and vote. As I said before, the census was our beginning. Voting is not our end. But if you want to understand and be truly a part of the system that you pay for, I'm your candidate. There are secret spaces and places that others in this room, others who have served in the past, have decided to keep us as community members from. I'm no holds bar. I have no secrets. What I'm looking to do is to bring us to the table. So we are no longer on the table, but we send the invitations about who's coming to our table, and we dictate the conversation. Everything that we need to solve our issues in 59B is already in this house. What we must do is make sure that we have consensus around what's important to us, how we want to achieve it, and my job is to make sure that it happens. I have federal experience, I have state experience, I have county experience, and city experience. I have chaired the City of Minneapolis's Empowerment Zone, which is an allocation of federal dollars. Although it has sunsetted because it was a program under Bill Clinton, the last 3 or 4 cycles that we had, I ensured that we had jobs for the youth in our Empowerment Zone. Since then, our kids have not had that same amount of money to be employed. You need someone who can access but build relationships and continue those relationships with city, federal, and county employees, elected officials, and those who have access to this community. So that way, when I come to you and say, hey, there's a meeting that I need you to go to, and I need you to represent our community, you can do so knowing that you have the full backing and the full support of all those that come behind. So as I said before, I'm your investment. You've taken time to talk with me, to mentor me, to teach me, and I am that return.
Thank you, Terra Cole. Finally, Bill McGaughey.
I would say, don't believe everything you hear politicians say. Don't believe everything you see the media say. Use your own judgment and your own experience of what you see. We were talking about jobs. I know of a young African-American woman who lost her job about 4 days ago. You don't want to know why? She was in a car, she ran out of gas, the state trooper pulled her over, or came there and discovered that she had an outstanding warrant that she didn't even know about. They revoked her license. Now she has no way to get to her work. We gotta stop this heavy-handed collection of money or whatever it is by the police department, by the government, whatever. Get off people's backs. Give people a break every once in a while. I have no magic solution, but I think I do have some common sense, and I would ask you to consider, if you really want to risk it, vote for a Republican this time.
Thank you so much, Bill McGaughey, Terra Cole, and Ray Dehn. Thank you all for your effort, your leadership, your service. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Join us again next time for Conversations with Al McFarland.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We got to say goodnight. We want to thank Al McFarland for bringing us all those great words and all our lovely guests, all the guests in the house. Everything's good, So I want y'all to tune in every Tuesday morning, right around 9 o'clock. Cause we're gonna play you a song. All the guests will be home. We'll be feeling like talking. Have a robust conversation. All our guests in the house. 2 million people out there. I know you're listening on the internet. KFA High. Come on, listen to the show. Come on, Al McFarland gonna let you know. Cause this thing he said, the message is clear.